What's up, everybody? Another week. We are finally in the Ohio High School Athletic Association playoff portion of the NLL Weekly Podcast. Chris Schmidbauer, Dan Naraki, thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Dan, definitely a surprise in the game that you and I did. Not so much that the Panthers won, just how easily that they ended up making it look. But overall, a pretty interesting matchup that I think, we're thinking was going to be a little bit closer, ended up not being so close. But I think some questions came out of that for one team, and another one has to be feeling pretty good about where they're at right now.
Certainly. And I think we can dive into this a little bit more later. But honestly, I think both teams probably came out with more questions than answers. And the advantage is that one has an extra 7 days to try to find those answers, and one has to fight their way to a possible rematch.
Yep. We got our guest joining us here in just a few moments. Before we do that, we want to say thank you to our main sponsor, Car Stereo One. Parker Lopez and his team, so good to us. They are the main sponsors of the show here. If you have any kind of audio work that you need to be done in your vehicle, Car Stereo One's where you want to go. But they don't just do that. They also do rims and tires, lighting, custom audio, suspension work, upholstery, window tint, wraps. They even work on boats and motorcycles. So anything that you could possibly need done to your vehicle, Car Stereo One can take care of it. Give them a call, 419-474-5553. You can visit them in person, 3120 Central Avenue, or, of course, online at carstereo1.com. And as always, we thank Car Stereo One and Parker Lopez's team for sponsoring the NLL Weekly Podcast. So excited to have our guest on this week. It's been a wonky year because of some different things, but so excited to have the head coach of the Napoleon Wildcats, Tyler Swary, on. Tyler, first off, thanks for joining us. I know, again, duty calls as a father, so we appreciate you making some time for us. But congratulations on winning a Cardinal Division championship this year.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you having me on. Always enjoy talking to you.
So let's rewind to the beginning of the year, because coming into the season, it was going to be George Egger's team, and that was how it was going to be. And once again, somehow you guys find another running back in the fold. Injury is kind of what forces you to do it. But talk about that running back room and just the fact that it seems like every year when the lead guy gets hurt, you guys seem to have somebody else in the chamber ready to go.
Yeah, definitely the next man up mentality. It was unfortunate. George pulled his hamstring August 1st, and it went from being, maybe out for a couple of weeks, maybe into week 1, week 2. And then it kind of kept lingering up until really Northview. Well, I would say Southview. We didn't really use him in Northview. So it was one of those where we didn't think it was going to be that bad. It was that bad. But again, Hayden Grohl, going into the year, we knew he was talented. He had some touches for us as a sophomore. Last year we were riddled with injuries and we had to move him around a little bit. He played some H-back for us last year as well. But when he did carry the ball, he's got really good vision. He's got really good footwork. And so we knew that he had some capabilities. And, when he got his opportunity to be, running back number 1, he took it and had a really good game against Defiance. I think he ended up with 150 yards rushing. We struggled in that game. He didn't get a ton of help. And was able to, push out 150 yards. And we kind of knew from there, we're going to be okay. And we got to continue to fight until we get George back. And then once George was back, that's a really dynamic backfield that we can have and we can rest guys and then we can put them in there together. And it just makes things a lot easier to call plays.
I want to go back to that opening week rivalry game because close loss, you guys graduated a lot of talent. I mean, that class that left after last year with Trey and some of the guys that were in that class, you're going into that knowing that you're replacing one of the more talented groups that's probably been in that school for a while as far as that class is concerned. Was there any concern on your part after that game of just making sure guys stayed locked in? Because you guys are in the unfortunate position, and maybe fortunate in some instances, unfortunate in others, where there's so much riding on that week 1 game. And I'm sure a lot of coaches would say, yeah, we like the pressure, but at the same time, I'd also like to be able to know what I have before I go into a rivalry game like that. So I guess what was the mood coming out of that game? And did you feel like the team was still locked in, or did it feel like you had to do a little bit extra to get them back?
I think a lot of people wrote us off after that. But when you really watch the film, and you got to give Defiance credit, you got to give their defense credit. We did not play to our standard. We struggled, blocking our outside run game, and we put ourselves in some really bad positions. But again, you got to give Defiance credit. They earned it. They won it. But we left that game, after watching film, saying we're a lot better football team than what we put out there, and we can sure some things up. We're going to be okay. And then obviously knowing, we can get George back on both sides of the ball, that's going to help as well. So, I think our kids, we've been preaching the last couple of years process over outcome. So
Sure.
Whether we win or lose games, it's all about the process and making sure that we're doing the little things right. And if we do, good things are eventually going to happen. And it's happened like that the last couple of years where it's one thing to say it, but we've actually seen it happen the last 2 years. So the kids have bought in and they understand that, and they know that there's more than just the wins and losses. It's what you're doing in between and preparing and all that kind of stuff.
I go back to that week 3 game against Anthony Wayne, and I know a lot of people are going to look at that, even though it was a loss, as one where you kind of made people sit up and take notice. Like you said, maybe people wrote you off after week 1, but they were probably starting to pen you back in after week 3. A 7-0 loss to Anthony Wayne. You think about just normal situation, and I know Anthony Wayne's young and they're replacing a lot, but at that point, you got a fairly healthy Anthony Wayne team going into that game. You got him earlier in the year. So to be fair to the effort that you guys put out there, it wasn't like you got him week 9 where guys are banged up and you're trying. I mean, you still have a relatively fresh team. Did you feel, again, even though it's a loss coming out of that week, okay, I think maybe we're starting to really click and be where we need to be? Because there were a lot of people who looked at that game. Again, you just stack it up, D4 school versus D2, team that was Buckeye Division champs last year, wasn't even close in most of their games. And then all of a sudden, you guys kind of come in and hold them to a touchdown and probably made them sweat much more than they probably anticipated going into your guys' game.
Yeah, in most years, I would, if you told me it was going to be a 1-score game between us and Anthony Wayne, I would take it. This year was different. We were disappointed that we lost the game because we really, again, when you watch the film, we should have won the game. We had some opportunities that we didn't capitalize on, and we played really well defensively. We turned them over a couple times, and then obviously we had an opportunity to score at the end, and they forced a fumble, which was a fantastic play by that kid. But that's one we walked away with saying, man, that was one we could have gotten. With Anthony Wayne, that's not the case every year. You can't say that every year with them.
Right.
That was the one year that we felt that we should have won, and we didn't. But again, like you said, you sit there and look at that and you say they're a good football team, a really good program, and we should have won the game. So we got to shore things up and make sure that we're fixing us, and things will work out.
And I think that's the one thing that when you look through that schedule, those first 4 weeks, it's kind of close loss, kind of a heartbreaking loss, tough loss. And as you know, as a coach, usually your team can go either way. They can rise to the occasion, lock back in, make sure something like that doesn't happen again, or it might go the other direction and you kind of lose focus. But you beat Clay the next week in Oregon. And I think about that game because being the guy that calls most of the Whitmer games, seeing what they're a good football team. I think people will look at that record at 6-4 and it's kind of deceiving because I believe that they're better than people probably think that they are. But again, going on the road after a loss and having to beat a team that most people would at the very least say is probably even with you guys on paper, to go into their place, beat them by a touchdown, and then come back and knowing that you're going into one more Buckeye game, but then that Cardinal Division schedule, your guys just felt like they were very resilient when their backs were up against the wall this year.
Yeah, that Clay game I think was a pivotal moment in our season. Defensively, we end up I think we intercepted him twice, took him back for touchdowns, and played extremely well defensively against a really good offense. They're great offense. And then offensively, we were terrible the first half. We were just awful. I don't know if we had one first down. And we had a little come to Jesus moment at halftime. And we came out and played really well. I think we only scored offensively 10 points, but we moved the ball. George then came in and played some offense in that second half, and things kind of started clicking, and it just felt different that second half than it had the last couple games. And so I think that was. And then you end up winning and have a ton of momentum, and I think kids then obviously they were believing already, but it was just one of those things where they finally got to start to see some of that work.
I will say, and I know I've told you this before, but for people who don't know a lot about or haven't paid as much attention to your guys' program, the thing about all of the sports there, and you can see it because a lot of the same kids play basketball, a lot of the same kids play baseball as well, but there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot that phases kids out there on those teams where, again, the first time I talked to you a couple years ago, you were 0-4 to start the year, and you'd wrap up the year and win the Cardinal Division, or at least threaten for the Cardinal Division, and barely lose to Southview on the road. I mean, it just seems like, and I don't know if it's an attitude out there. I don't know, Tyler, if you think it's something that you guys are doing, if there's something in the water. Is it a situation where, what is it about that district and that group of kids that they just don't seem to get bothered by a whole lot? They just are able to kind of bounce back and move to the next week.
I think, obviously a lot has to do with the parents, and being resilient and, and like I said, we've been preaching that process over outcome, and whatever happens, and there's a lot that goes into a game where is out of your control. And so, I try to do the best that I can in terms of, calls that I don't like, or, things like that are out of my control. And, I don't do great very often, in those situations sometimes, but, I think we've gotten better at that and just understanding, next play mentality and flush it and then move on. And our kids have done a great job of that. And like you said, we've had some success the last couple of years in basketball. Last year they got to the regionals, and then in baseball the last 2 years have had some really good runs. So those kids have got to play a lot of different sports and been in a lot of different situations. And I think that a lot of that has to help with that.
And it's a mindset too, because once you've made a deep postseason run, regardless of the sport, it doesn't matter. Yeah, the games are different, but the mentality has to be the same once you go into a conference run, trying to make a postseason run. When you've been in those situations and the kids have been in those situations repeatedly, there's a lot less psychological training you probably have to do on your end, because the guys know what it takes, regardless of the sport, to get and make a deep postseason run, but also to win a league championship.
Yeah, and like you said, 2 years ago, we played Southview the last game of the season for that, the NLL title, and didn't win it, but we were in it. And then, the last 2 years we've upset some teams in the playoffs and have gotten to, a couple weeks extra of our season. And I think that goes a really long way. So, we're going to play a really good Perkins team next week in the regional quarterfinals. And our kids, all of them, almost all those guys were part of last year and then the year before. And so it's now, and that's why I love the playoff expansion, because again, for some of those years, we wouldn't have been in that, it would have been over. So the fact that they got those, that experience and it's just it's a playoff game, right? They just expect, we're going to go play a playoff game. So, and I think that builds over time, and that just doesn't happen overnight.
Let's go to that week 9 game. Cardinal Division's on the line. It probably would not be known for its offensive showcasing. 7-0. You guys are able to get a late touchdown against Fremont Ross. That game, I'm sure, a lot of nerves, a lot of tension, because the longer it goes that nobody scores, probably the tighter guys get. What allowed you to finally break through? But also, if you could speak about just that game in general, and that's really what you want a title deciding game to be, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it was a great atmosphere. As much as I hate playing and going to Fremont, I love playing in that stadium.
Yeah,
just that it was a great atmosphere, very playoff like atmosphere. But yeah, no, we went into that game. Obviously, both teams hadn't won a conference title in a long time, and so there was definitely, I think, some nerves with that. But no. We struggled offensively a little bit, and you got to give Fremont Ross credit. Their defense is really, really
yes,
good.
It is
very good. So we knew that going in, it was going to be tough to get some yardage. But you watch the film during the game a little bit on the sidelines, and you go into halftime and talk it out a little bit. And there was just some things that we weren't doing very well, and we needed to make sure that we were shoring things up. And it only took one drive, and that's all we really needed. And I think it was 17 plays, 80 some yards, and took over 9 minutes. And that's hard to do in high school football.
Sure.
As a defensive coordinator, our goal is just to bend but don't break, and because normally a high school kid's going to screw up after about 5 plays, whether it's a false start or a missed assignment. And so to be able to do that for 17 straight plays and drain the clock like that and then score was really, really awesome for our offense. And then defensively, our kids have been playing out of their mind really all year. So I give those guys credit. They fly around, they hit, they tackle. And it's really fun to coach them this year.
I think about a week 10 game like last week, and I imagine on one hand, you're probably, I don't want to say relieved, but probably, going into that, okay, more than likely have our easiest game that we've had in a few weeks. Kind of anticlimactic because you were able to wrap up the division the previous week, but did you feel like the kids let down at all, or were they just as locked in going into last week?
No, they were locked in, and that was one thing that we talked about the week before going into that game. You've got to play off a home game clinched. You've got your conference title. What are you playing for? So it was senior night, so we wanted to play for our seniors. We wanted to win for our seniors. We wanted the first round bye. We wanted to be in the top 4. And then we wanted an 8-win season. And I did some math. This was only the 7th time since 2000 that we had an 8-win season.
Wow.
And then I went back to Coach Buckemeyer, legendary Coach Buckemeyer. Was his last year was 77. So it's 78. Since then, it was only like the 9th or 10th.
Wow.
It was the 10th season as an 8-win season. So 48 years, 10 8-win season. So that was something that I plugged in their ear of, that's something that we could play for and be really special. And I think that was motivation enough.
You mentioned having some upsets the last couple of years in the playoffs. And one of the things I would imagine you feel is beneficiary to you is that you guys play up division wise every week. There isn't a whole lot of games that you have. In fact, I don't think you had any games against another Division 4 team. How much does playing the bigger schools prepare you guys for the playoffs? I would imagine in a way, not that there aren't teams that aren't good in Division 4, because there clearly are, but I would imagine in a sense it at least makes it where you guys aren't seeing anything as far as the level of competition or the skill set that you haven't seen already during the regular season.
Yeah, I think the big thing with us is we see size and speed throughout the year. So whether the team is better than us or not, they usually are bigger than us. They usually have some fast guys, and then so you look at Sandusky Perkins. They're really big up front. They've got some really, really fast guys on the edges, and it's one of those where our kids aren't going to be shell shocked going against them, because we've seen that. Fremont Ross was huge, and they've got really good athletes on the edges. So now is Perkins really good? Absolutely,
sure.
Those guys up front are really, really good, but there's just the sheer size wise, the shock factor should not be there, because we're used to that. We're used to being the smaller guys.
And I think probably for you guys as well, there's a level of confidence maybe going in where you're not going to see anything that you can't handle either. I mean, I know that the shock of the size and speed, but also just you've got really good coaches, obviously, in all of these, at a lot of these schools, and even in your division, I'm sure as well. But you're not going to see anything that you wouldn't have seen otherwise during the regular season. And I also think there's a mentality that you guys have where you embrace that challenge, and there's two ways you can go with it. You can go where you kind of play the victim card, or the other side is you can embrace that, hey, we've got to go against bigger teams. That's the lot we've been dealt. So let's go ahead and make the best case scenario out of it. And for the most part, year in and year out, that's kind of the way that you guys have approached it. And that's going all the way back to even when Napoleon joined the Northern Lakes League 15, 20 years ago. Nobody, I wouldn't say nobody, most people, maybe outside of Napoleon, didn't think that this program was going to be able to compete year in and year out in the league. And yet here you are every year giving teams some headaches, pulling off an upset or two, scaring some teams that think they're going to walk past you guys, and you guys play them tight the whole game. It really is that mentality that, and I'm sure you probably want to keep that going, of embracing that challenge of playing bigger schools. And that's just the way it's going to be. And we can either hide from it or we can embrace it.
Yeah. And like you said, it's been like that for a long time here. I've got guys on my staff that obviously played at Napoleon, and they were in the GBC, the GLL, when they were still the small school, and then, when I got here with Tori, when we first joined the NLL, we were the smallest school. And, we were always, almost every year, we were in the top half of the league, and so it's always just been that mentality of, we're not the biggest, fastest, strongest, but we want to be the toughest. And, when you leave the field, whether we won or lost, you remember us, so, that's been kind of ingrained in the football program for a long time. And that's one thing that I want to continue while I'm here.
Well, with the expansion and having a bye week, I know on one hand, you probably love it to a degree because you get a chance to get guys healthy. You get a week to go easy on the guys. Same time, never had this before. You've never had to encounter it. There's a lot of coaches, I think, all the way through that are probably thinking, all right, how do I approach this? Because it's not something we've had to deal with. What are the plans? How are you guys trying to approach this week? Obviously, rest and recuperation, I'm sure, is a big factor, but what are some of the other things you're trying to do this week? Because last thing you want to do, and I go back to the college football playoff last year, all of the teams that had the byes ended up losing, and except for, I think, Texas. So there is something to be said about keeping playing and not being as sharp. Granted, your layoff is only a week and not like 4 weeks like it was for the college football side of things. But what are you doing this week to try and keep the guys fresh, but also locked in going into that second round game?
Yeah, I haven't decided whether I like it or not. If we win, then I'll love it. If
so you'll let me know Friday.
It's the guy's fault,
Yeah.
That's but no, it's we want to keep it as regular as possible. Practice will be a little shorter. We won't do as much team time. It'll be, we want to do a lot of indie and group work stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, this week, we want our young guys
yes,
as much drill time as possible. This, like I said earlier, with extra weeks in the playoffs, I think has been huge the last couple of years building through, because those guys get in, they've gotten an extra 6 weeks of practice. And so, for our young guys, it's a great week to get them some reps and drill them and really coach them up. But no, and then, we're going to get in the weight room. We want to, we lifted them heavy today. We'll lift them heavy on Wednesday and then Friday. And then, really, no practice on Friday. They're going to lift. And then we've kind of talked about maybe having one of the parents do some type of watch party. And
sure.
The coaches, we're going to go live scout Perkins, but I don't really want our kids driving to Sandusky and it looks like it might be rainy. And
yeah,
so I'd rather them sit in the basement and eat some pizza and watch the game with their buddies. So, it's nice to have this week knowing, you're not going to play on Friday. You can, relax as much as you can. But it's one of those where it's, we've got 2 weeks to prepare, and obviously Perkins has to play Clearview. I don't think it's any, any shock that I think Perkins is going to win that game. So we've got, 2 weeks to prepare for them and kind of get things ready to go going into next week and really know what we want to do.
You hit on something that I love talking about with coaches because I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but I was a student manager at Ohio State, and the bowl week practices, those practices before we actually went to the bowl site were exactly what you just said, which is it wasn't about the guys who played and who have started all season, the Troy Smiths, the AJ Hawks when I was there. Those guys, it wasn't those weeks weren't about those guys. It was about the freshmen, the sophomores, the redshirt guys. Because they haven't had a chance to play competitively, if you will. Yeah, you're in practice, but usually running scout team. You're usually doing other stuff to try and get the starters of that second group ready. And then on top of that, you also probably want to see what those guys have because you want to have an idea going into next year. So really those deep playoff runs, those extra practices can end up being a springboard going into next season. Not that you're thinking about that, but really that can give you a good jumping off point going into 2026.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's our winter sports start next week. So I told him, you're with us here for a week, and then, we'll cut it down. We'll cut down a practice squad going into next week. And then since we're home, we're going to let all the kids dress regardless whether practicing with us or not.
Sure.
Get them all on the sidelines and get to experience that, on the field on Friday.
Can you feel it in the town there? I mean, I know smaller town. Is that a situation, especially when you guys have a good year, that you can just kind of feel the buzz in the air around Napoleon?
Yeah, absolutely. I was at this Halloween parade thing tonight. Yeah. I had, 5 people telling me, great season, good luck next week, So it's definitely, it's been, people have been excited about it. I think our crowd was pretty good on last Friday, even though they knew it probably wasn't going to be a very, competitive game, and people showed up. So we're excited that we haven't had a home playoff game since 2012. And I think our town has been itching for something like this. So I'm excited to see if we come out and support the boys on Friday.
I guess every coach has confidence going into postseason. You have to feel pretty good. Again, as you said, first 8-win season in a few years, and one of the few 8-win seasons since the 1970s. But where or what are you thinking about wanting to get better at, knowing that we've got to be doing these things if we want to make a deep run?
We need to be more we need to be better up front. And that's every game,
Sure.
We need to communicate better. And then something that we struggled the last few games is, our passing game, just completing passes. We're not going to throw the ball much, but when we do, we need to be efficient and hurt teams when they're trying to stack the box. And we haven't been good enough at that. And that goes, with pass protection, that goes with our route running, and then throwing and catching the ball. There's multiple things that go into that. And that's something that we're trying to work on this week to make sure that we're ready to go, because we're going to need it against Perkins. You're not just going to be able to run every single play against them. We're going to have to throw the ball. And when we do, we got to be efficient.
And probably in a way, I'd imagine, kind of the way you're talking, that you're probably doing some self-scouting this week of, all right, what are our weaknesses? What are the tendencies? Because that's the one thing at this point in time, everybody's an open book. You've got 10 weeks worth of film that everybody has, probably with scrimmages 12. And so everybody's been able to see what you guys are doing. So there's probably a level 2 where you're looking at, what did you do this season? And all right, where are we predictable? Where can we be better at play calling and be diverse? Or do we come out in a different formation for this one play that we really like? I'm sure you're probably doing a lot of that this week as well.
Yeah. Yep. And that's really, we try to do that every couple of weeks, kind of look and see what we've done those last 3 weeks. And are we too predictable? And, if we are, what can we do to throw a team off? Or, we really like this can we run it out of this formation instead? Or, teams are shifting to one side when we get in this, what plays can we do to the backside? So, obviously, all year looking at stuff like that. And especially now where, you look at Perkins and you say, okay, when they watch our last, 4 games, what are they going to stop? What teams are they going to look at that played us and say, okay, we can do that, or we can kind of mimic that. And because that seemed to hurt them, so we got to be able to figure out, okay, when they do this, we got to be able to do this, so definitely some self-scouting and just preparation for really anything. That's the tough thing about our offense is when we go into every week, we have no idea how the defense is going to play us.
Sure.
We're not a typical, spread team where, you're going to get a 1 technique and a 3 technique and, 2 linebackers or whatever. They might put every D lineman on one side of the ball and force us to do something else. So we have rules. Our offensive line has rules. We got to make sure that we're communicating and we're doing those rules. And then as an offensive staff, we need to make sure that we're in game watching and saying, okay, they're doing this every time, we can do this instead to combat that. And so I think we've done a good job of that throughout the year, and we need to continue to do that.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask about Trey Rubenstein. I know it looks, just kind of looking at his numbers, looks like he's probably redshirting this year, but what does it mean for your program to have you guys put somebody in Division I or FBS college football? Not that you haven't had a lot of college players. I'm sure you get guys that go to D2, D3 schools every year, but it probably provides a little bit of extra incentive to say to some of those kids who might think, I can't do that from here, or I don't think I could reach that level. Trey proves that it's possible to be at a Division IV school and get recruited to an FBS school. And not that there's anything overly unique necessarily of that not happening a lot, but I imagine for you guys to have somebody that you're saying, hey, he's playing in the MAC right now, and you can do that too. Does that provide an extra incentive or maybe a little bit of, a badge for your program to wear and say, like, you can make this happen if you just kind of do the things we need you to do? Yeah.
And actually he got his red shirt taken away.
Oh, really? Okay.
So he's playing on almost every special team. And then I think he's the backup at one of the linebackers.
Okay.
So they beat BG last week. He had a couple tackles on special teams. And then I think I saw his mom posted something about him. I think he played a little bit of defense too. So super proud of Trey. He was a great football player for us, hard worker, tremendous athlete. And I think that, having a kid like that come through our program, and the guys got to see now he's a freak athlete.
Sure.
So, not everybody is like that, but he paired that with his work ethic and his time in the weight room and all the off season stuff he was doing as well. And so when you can see that, and the kids are around that and they see him working so hard, that just fuels the entire program. So, and then I want to give a shout out to his older brother, Tanner, who is at Siena Heights. He left to go to Toledo. And so he's playing fullback for Toledo.
Okay.
In their jumbo package. And then he's a backup tight end for them too. So got to go up to Toledo and watch them play Kent State last week. So really cool to see those guys on the field together and got to talk to them a little bit after the game. So really cool to have Napoleon kids, playing at that level and just to see their work and everything pay off.
Well, I love talking to you because, again, I think just the mentality, and again, I know we've talked about this before, but I just love the approach that you guys have out there. And there's something about going into those games. And again, I did a Napoleon basketball game last year when they were playing in I think it was regional final, and they ended up beating a team that nobody thought they were going to beat. There's just something about the programs out there, the coaching out there, that you guys just do such a tremendous job of making sure that nobody goes into those games thinking that you don't have a chance. And so I really admire what you guys do out there. Congrats on all your success. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. And hopefully you get a chance to rest yourself a little bit this week. It sounds like you got a full house going on back there.
Oh,
so
you probably heard everything yelling around. Yeah, I'm out on the sunroom porch, so they're all like right here, and yeah, you probably got to hear everything.
just with that sugar rush, I'm sure, coming out of that Halloween parade. So
yeah,
but
yeah.
I appreciate it, Tyler. Best of luck to you, man, and congratulations. Always appreciate talking with you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on. It was great talking to you, man.
All right, that's Tyler Swary, the head football coach at Napoleon. We always appreciate him joining us on NLL Weekly. Just one of our favorite coaches, like I said, because there's something about having a David in your league when you're playing a lot of Goliaths and to not be afraid. That is a group, and I'm not saying that they're unique necessarily compared to other teams in this league, but every year people count that group out to some degree, and he's right. After that first game, I'll be honest, I was probably one of the ones going, maybe not going to be as good of a year for Napoleon after they lost to Defiance. And yet here they are, Cardinal Division champs, first round playoff game or bye, and then a home playoff game. Just a really great season again for them, despite losing someone in the caliber of Trey Rubenstein. They're able to figure out a way through injuries and all that good stuff. Just a really fun team to cover and a great program to watch achieve success every year when everybody kind of counts them out.
Well, and I think it boils down to a lot of the things that you had mentioned, but I mean, it starts at the top and great people at the top, clearly all around the coaching. But what that generates is something that we talk a lot about in the pro ranks, especially when you're talking about a team that just can't seem to get over the hump and get out of their own way. They have set themselves a culture.
Yes.
Or they have said, sure, we're not the biggest, but you're going to find out. What's the cliche word? Not the biggest dog in the fight, but the biggest fight in the dog.
Yeah.
I probably screwed that up, but the point remains. But that's exactly it. That's the mentality. And when you go in and you play sports for Napoleon High School, if I'm going out, I'm going to go out and leave everything I have on the field, because that is what we're expected to do as Wildcats, is play up and play tough and make people realize exactly what kind of spirit we have out here.
Yeah, again, that's one of those teams that just year in and year out, they continue to surprise me. I think they continue to surprise the league. And like I said, it's been going on since they joined in, I think it's 2011. And ever since then, every year, they may not always win 8 games. They may not, well, obviously they don't always win 8 games, but they may not always, have a great start to the year, but you cannot overlook that team ever. I don't care who you are. I don't care what time of the year it is. That is a group that every year is going to come and they're going to give you their best shot. And I admire that a lot. But speaking of best shots, Whitmer, we weren't sure what we were going to get last week. And we'll talk about this because I do think it probably surprised just about everybody how that team rebounded. And I'll let you kind of give your thoughts first, because I have a feeling that a lot of people would probably know what mine are, because I pretty much was on the air a lot. But you were field level. You saw a lot of that stuff. You hear more than I get to hear up in the press box. What was your take from what you saw? Because what we thought we were going to see and what we saw were two totally different things.
There were 2 things that stood out, especially at the very beginning of that game, being on the sideline in the first quarter, and you just kind of have this feeling between both players and coaches, and that no one was really in a moment of panic. Like, whatever they needed to do to put that loss to Clay in the background, it seemed like everyone had done that, and this was just we're right back to business. And we're right back to taking care of what we know we need to be A, B, C, and D, and 1, 2, and 3, and we're gonna make sure that we hit everything that we need to hit. And I think the second part of that, and I think it's something that Coach Kettle alluded to after the game, in so many words, is that this is a team that decided that they were not going to be defined by one loss.
Sure.
They were not going to be defined by a night where it seemed nothing was going to go their way and the mistakes just piled up. That wasn't going to be how they wanted this season to be remembered or ended by. And they went out and did everything they needed to do to pretty much wash that taste out of their mouth.
You think about the difference too, that a fairly healthy Jamon Holmes, a fairly healthy Joey Morales, who was phenomenal on Friday, and a fairly healthy Jaden Jones gives you. And it's crazy to say, but when you look at how well Whitmer has run the football this year from start to finish, and you think about how dominant that ground game has been, how good that line has progressed throughout the season, it does show you, though, how much room there still is for that running back room to get even better. You have now 3 guys that, yes, there's definitely some drop off between some of them where speed may not be the same or way they run may not be the same, but they all have a skill set that makes them very tough to tackle, to get a beat on. And this is easier said than done, but if this team runs the football the way that they did last week through the playoffs, it's going to be a very fun month of November in Washington Township. Now, can't say they'd get to the final, don't know where they'd get to, but if they can ride that rushing attack and they can play to the level that they played, it's going to be more often than not that they're going to be successful in those games. And I think about, like I said, to say that that room is just, in my opinion, starting to get to where it may be at its peak. That's scary to say that you're in week 11 now, and that room is just starting to maybe hit its peak status or peak performance. And I would be really concerned if I were opposing coaches scouting that Whitmer team, because there is a 3-headed monster in the backfield that you have to contend with, and somebody may be able to handle him. But when those 3 guys are healthy, be really tough to beat Whitmer if they're running the football the way that they did.
Well, and that's what makes them so difficult to plan for, especially at this level, is when you have multiple guys in that running back room whose talents complement each other well, so that you may see them run the same play, but because that's a different back there,
sure,
you're going to get a completely different look. And I think they did very well in finding their matchups in the trenches and taking advantage of those. I think I said it all night long about the left side of the offensive line and how well they were and how dominant they were, especially in the beginning, because I think the first 4 or 5 plays of the game for Whitmer's offense were all design runs to that left side.
Yeah.
With huge holes being open, but then you take advantage of Jamon's speed to the edge. And once he gets to the edge, he has that ability to make guys miss. And that's where Perrysburg had to swarm 2 and 3 guys to the ball, because he's also not an easy runner to bring down.
Right.
So to switch up, now you run everything inside the tackles, and that's where Joey looked much the strongest at times, is he was able to do so much after contact and get through. I mean, you were saying it almost every play. Joey lowers his shoulder into contact and picks up an extra yard.
Yeah.
Picks up an extra 2 yards. And that's just the mentality there. So having to face a run game like that, the old cliche thunder and lightning to a certain extent, but it might actually just be thunder, thunder, and thunder. Makes them very difficult. And like you said, is that enough alone to carry you deep into the playoffs? No, obviously everything else on the field has to complement itself, but it's a really good start, and it's going to make sure that you're not out of any games, especially against teams as you get further in that may be bigger, that may have FBS guys that you're staring down, to where you haven't seen those since week 2. It keeps them in those games as opposed to dramatically outmatched.
To borrow a line that Mason Lowry had said a couple weeks ago, and he's totally correct, if you can run the football, you're going to have a good shot most weeks. And like you said, not everything, but it's a really, really good starting point for what you want to do to be able to control the clock, to control the pace, And it's one of those that when it's colder, when it's raining, when maybe there's moisture, or again, you get some of that dew that starts forming later in the evening, that's when the running game becomes even more crucial, because that usually travels better than the passing game usually travels. Not to say it's impossible, but once again, more often than not, the running game is where you're going to be able to be consistently good versus not so much if you're unable to run the football. And that's the big challenge moving forward. Whitmer, with the win, gets the first round bye. They will take on the winner of Perrysburg and St. Ignatius, which we can talk about who Perrysburg is playing here in a second. But if you're Dirk Connor, who we had on last week, as we said, enjoy talking with him. I imagine, knowing the kind of competitive guy he is, had to have been really frustrated with what he saw last Friday. And my guess is as well that they are challenging that group this week, because I don't want to say too much about the opponent. They're playing St. Ignatius, but it's not a cakewalk like we talked about last week. And I can recite my whole reasons again, but reality is that's a group that has to get up off the mat quickly, like we talked about with Whitmer last week. That's a group in Perrysburg that has to get up off the mat quickly and get locked back in, because there is no doubt that Friday is going to be a lot tougher than most of the 5-12 matchups around the state of Ohio.
No doubt, no doubt. And it'll be interesting to see the motivations here and who wins out, because if you're Perrysburg, obviously, as you just mentioned, you're highly motivated to flip the script from a week ago, to come back and show that's not your team, that's not your style of football, that's not how the season's going to be remembered. And you have on the other side a team that is a traditional powerhouse that has not had a great season record-wise, but there's no doubt there's talent there, and it got a second chance to extend their season, and they'll be highly motivated to prove that they're far better than their record. It would show that they've faced and at times hung with some of the best competition in the state, or at least in the division. And, you know, they're like I said, highly motivated to not finish their season in week 11, because it was very close to finishing their season in week 10.
Yeah. And I think about the challenge that they face. You mentioned a traditional power. They've not been good at Ignatius record wise the last few years. Last year was 1-9. This year's 1-9. Twice they've lost to, I guess you call it a Canadian All-Star team in week 10. But when I was reciting back to you last week, now with Football North winning, the combined record of the opponents is 70-18 now. And that's the record of the opponents that Ignatius played this year. I think about just the mind bending that has to happen to know how good or bad or where that team is. Because as I was saying to you beforehand, you put the film on, they're playing teams that are really good, and they're going to make Ignatius look not very good. That can be a little bit of a mind warp, and you're going to come out of that thinking, well, is that because of the competition? Is it because they're not as good? Or is it a little bit of both? And same thing, I was saying to you, you're probably, if you're Dirk and his staff, going through and looking, okay, what guys are we seeing on film from some of the opponents, the St. Ed's, the Benedictines, that we can say our guys are similar to, and what did those teams do against Ignatius to be successful? Not saying that Perrysburg's going to be able to replicate what Ed's did or what Benedictine did, but I don't know how else you would attack it, simply because going purely off of, I know how good those opponents are, and I know Ignatius isn't in that category anymore, but much like we just talked about with Tyler Swary and Napoleon, you're playing really good competition, and there is not anything that Perrysburg's going to present on Friday that Ignatius has not seen or experienced this year. And that is really where I think you have to be cognizant of this being much tougher than I believe people think it will be. John Marshall was supposed to be the 12 seed. They ended up opting out of the playoffs, and we could talk all day about what does that say about 12 teams in the playoffs. And even that, you got teams who are like, yeah, we still don't want any part of this. And I don't know what the situation was at John Marshall, but they elected not to play. And you think about that moment, you're thinking we got John Marshall probably coming in on Saturday, and then all of a sudden the pairings come out last night, and you're playing Ignatius, and you're not playing John Marshall. And that week, or the preparation for the week, has changed dramatically, because that is, like I said, just not going to be a cakewalk by any stretch. And like we talked about with Whitmer and St. Ed's last year, 5-5 was very deceiving. And that was an Ed's team that had played really good competition. And as I said last year, there was nothing that Whitmer was going to do that was going to be much better or any better than some of the guys that they had already faced. They played one of the tougher schedules in the state. Ignatius's, by, I think, Drew Pastor's thing is like, I don't know, like top 10 schedule, strength of schedule in the state. And I just know that Friday they better be ready. And it's not that I'm predicting an upset on paper, because I think Perrysburg certainly can win that game, but that's going to be a dogfight, and it's not going to be one that's going to be where Perrysburg's up 49-0 in the third quarter and you got a running clock. If they do, more power to them. And then if I'm Whitmer, all of a sudden I'm going, oh, shoot, because you're going to get them the next week. But the other side of this is, I don't know who, if you're Whitmer too, who you want to play again. Not that we have to talk about that totally in depth, because we can talk about it more next week, but I don't know which is the better advantage. Do you want to face Ignatius because they are the 12 and they've only won, they would have won in theory 2 games at that point? Or do you want to play a team that's going to be highly incentivized to come back to your place and get revenge on you, much like they did 2 years ago, and move on to the third round of the playoffs? I don't know. But I would be very cautious if I'm Perrysburg this week, knowing that we got to be buttoned up. We got to be very effective, and we cannot turn the ball over the way that we did. You think about the turnovers. This is the other part of this game that a lot of people don't realize. Brady Maxwell threw 2 interceptions, probably should have thrown 4, because there were 2 that went right through defenders' hands that they should have caught. And then on top of that, there was a fumble on a kickoff, the first kickoff after Whitmer scored, that was fumbled and rolled out of bounds because Cam Sanders tried to pick it up instead of falling on it. That could have been a 5 turnover game. I don't care how good you are. Can't turn the ball over 5 times and beat anybody. And they will have to play probably close to their best game that they've played all season long. You cannot go into this week thinking a mediocre to subpar type of performance is going to be good enough to get you into the second round.
And that's where, Dirk Connor and his staff have a unique challenge ahead of them this week that, a lot of, I assume a lot of the 5s, we'll see, we probably see it more on the basketball side when it comes to this, but you have those mid-high seeds who come in playing lower seeds, but talented teams that got in a low seed for one reason or the other. And you have to spend the week emphasizing all the things that you said about this is not your normal game. This is not a game where we can take ourselves, we have to take our opponents lightly, pardon me. We have to find a way to push past the numbers and remember we're Perrysburg and we're in the playoffs and we have a standard. And I don't care who we are in, if it's St. Ignatius, John Marshall, Whitmer, and we have a standard that we play at, and it doesn't matter against who, we will hit that standard. And that combined with the whole 24-hour rule that I'm sure their players had too. That's probably I can't imagine anybody on that sideline saw that game going that way too, and almost coughing the ball up so much. So there's a lot of mental work as much going in this week as the physical work.
Anthony Wayne turning the page, gets a nice win over Findlay. They win 20-19 on the road to close out the regular season. They will play Start on Friday in their first round game. I don't want to say that that's not quite the same 5-12 challenge, because it's not, but I also would say that Anthony Wayne may be starting to figure things out, and we'll have to wait and see, because obviously it's being consistent and being able to replicate those performances. But Anthony Wayne has to feel pretty good about going on the road, closing the year with a close win over a really good team, and that might be enough to get them on a bit of the roll going to the playoffs. And I go back to Andy Brungard's first few years at Anthony Wayne. It seemed like his teams were like 7-3, 6-4 going into the playoffs a lot of years. And then they would just get on this roll and they would run their way all the way through to like the regional final. Not sure that that'll happen, but that could provide a lot of momentum going into the postseason.
To draw a comparison to another sport, which, I'd love to mix my metaphors here, but it's the equivalent of your hockey team in April hitting their stride because their goalie decides, I'm a brick wall now. Forget everything else about the last 4 months. I'm going to stop literally everything you get thrown at me, and you can ride that hot hand all the way to a championship. It's a very similar thing. It's a really interesting region for us locally here too, because we have local teams playing in all 4 games this week, and some potential there for some interesting matchups in the second round. But yeah, I think you've got it there, is that Anthony Wayne faced that adversity early, and it probably for everybody out in White House was a frustrating couple of weeks while they got their feet back underneath them and figured things out, but they're rolling downhill now.
I really wished we would have gotten either a St. Francis Clay, a St. Francis Fremont Ross. I wish we would have gotten one of those, because you're right. This is probably the region that, if I'm looking at it and saying the most interesting local teams possibly going against one another, but the way it stacks up, they would have to all probably get to the third round to face, and for us to get like a Northwest Ohio regional final or regional semifinal. But St. Francis, they play Valley Forge at home. Fremont Ross is on the road. They are at Olmsted Falls. Start, as we said, at Anthony Wayne. And then Clay has to go to Brecksville, Broadview Heights. That's a mouthful. And I think about the NLL, that Buckeye division. 5 of your 6 teams are in the playoffs. 3 of your 6 teams were in contention to get a first round bye. The only reason 2 didn't is because they played each other in week 10. And then Anthony Wayne, with the big win against Findlay, almost pushed their way into a first round bye. There was a big distance between them and North Ridgeville, but they jumped. We talked about points and what it did for Clay after they beat Whitmer, that jump. Same thing here. Anthony Wayne went from potentially the 7 or 8 to the 5. But I just look at that Buckeye division, and honestly the Cardinal too, with Fremont Ross. You got Napoleon in. You've got 2 teams there that are in the conversation. That's a nice feather in the cap of the league to say, especially in that division, that 5 of our 6 teams are in, and all 5 of them could easily win a first round playoff game. And if you're Whitmer, make it to the regional final or win a second round playoff game. That speaks to how good this league is from top to bottom. But overall, especially the Anthony Wayne, Finley's I have to say Finley. So there are two teams that have a first round bye. Finley has a first round bye as well. I can't kind of forget that they're in a different region. So you do have two teams with a first round bye, almost a third with a first round bye. That's an impressive showing by that Buckeye division. And as I said to you a few weeks ago, you think about how deep that Buckeye division was and how it wasn't just 3 teams and then everybody else. 5 of those 6 teams all showed why that division was so good this year. And I know it's disappointing for Perrysburg to share it. I know Whitmer is absolutely thrilled that they shared it. But to accomplish that feat, knowing how difficult that division was this year, it's pretty impressive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like you said, it speaks so well of the league, and it's a bit of a different mentality now that we've spent the last 5 or 6 weeks beating on each other. Let's turn around and go beat on some other competition for a little bit.
For sure. Out of the area, again, area teams, but not in the NLL. We mentioned St. Francis. They play Valley Forge. That'll be at the Glass Bowl on Friday. St. John's didn't make it in. They were close, but just ended up finishing as the 13th seed. Central, I talked about this game a lot last week. I didn't know what we were going to see from Central. Were they going to beat Mona Shores? They did, and did so fairly convincingly. 27-10, good win for Central Catholic. That's a good team. And now the questions begin because they will have a first round playoff game against Ontario on Friday. And then should they be victorious, then they have to go to the team that a lot of people feel that might be the team that you don't want to face the most, which is they would play Lexington. And Lexington's a team that I think Central only beat by like a point or 2 last year. They would have to go on the road. Not an easy path, but as I said before, I would be surprised if Central is not the regional champ out of that region. We'll see. I could be wrong, but that one, that Lexington game is going to be another good litmus test of where that team is at in the postseason. It was a good win last week. You beat a good football team. You feel good about where you're at, but same thing going into that second weekend of the playoffs. That's where Central is going to find out again. All right, how good are we? Are we as dominant as we have been in the past, or are we maybe not as good as we were in recent years? So interested to see what the Irish do, but I know it was one where a lot of people were hoping it wasn't going to be a team that finished 5-5, and 6-4 against the schedule that they played is an accomplishment in of itself. I don't want to necessarily say that anybody's probably thrilled with 6-4 over there, but at the same time, you also have to be realistic about the kind of team that they had and the kind of schedule that they had to go against. But now it's time to kind of put, money where your mouth is. Now's the time where, to use another cliche, rubber meets the road here, and it's time to kind of lock in and get ready to go, because this is a Central team that a lot of people still expect to be Central Catholic Classic, and we'll see if they can hold up to that standard.
And there's that extra level of motivation right there to be able to go, yeah, sure. Okay, 6 seed, that's fine. We can do it from it from the 1 seed. We can do it from the 6 seed. We can do it from the 12 seed if we have to. But yeah, like you said, I'm sure there's a lot of people over on Cherry Street with that mentality of motivation. Like, we got to the playoffs. This is our time.
Yeah, the old phrase of just a chip in a chair.
Yep.
Kind of the same thing here. You just got to get in. Once you're at the dance, it's what you make of it, but you just got to get into the dance, and Central did. So congratulations to them on getting that win. Not that they were ever in doubt of getting in, but there was a lot of people who thought if they lost last week, that was going to be pretty much road games all the way through for Central. At least they're able to get the one home game for the rest of the season. So at least one more chance to play in front of the home fans. As we talked about with Tyler, his team beats Waite last week. Pretty lopsided win for the Wildcats. And now he's kind of said that he thinks he knows who they're going to play. He thinks it's Sandusky Perkins. And when you look at the fact that they're playing Lorraine Clearview, who's 5-5, we'll see. Might be surprised. Upsets do happen, but that's a Napoleon team with where they're at. I expect them to make a fairly significant run. I feel that team's playing really well right now. There's a lot of confidence in that group. And I would also say that, much like I kind of said to Tyler when we were talking to him, there won't be a whole lot that they will be surprised by or have not seen or be fazed by when they see the teams that they'll face in that region. Now, once they get out of it, I mean, Shelby is 10-0. Galleon above them is the 2 seed, is 9-1. But Shelby's probably going to be the team that's waiting for them if they are to get to a regional final. But overall, I think this Napoleon team can absolutely make it to a state Final Four. I think they've got that chance. Do need some things to go their way for sure, but they've proven the last few years that they can make a little bit of a run. I expect this group to make maybe the deepest run that they've made in a long time.
And don't underestimate the fact that they're basically eating home cooking for at least 2 more rounds.
Yeah.
Because everyone in this region has to make a significant trek west when they go play the Wildcats.
And we talked about Whitmer. Whitmer, first round bye. Again, they'll play the winner of Perrysburg, Ignatius. Again, we'll see how all of that ends up sorting itself out moving forward. But again, I thought overall a good showing where kind of we thought that some of the teams were. Whitmer clearly the biggest surprise just because they were so dominant in their game. But everybody else outside of Anthony Wayne really ended up where we thought they were going to end up. And I'm really curious to see how this league approaches this first round, because there's a lot of opportunity to make some noise. Northwest Ohio, a lot of people say, doesn't get a lot of respect. Do want to highlight Liberty Benton, by the way, in their last year, and you just had it scroll, so thank you for the reminder. But Liberty Benton last year in the Blanchard Valley Conference finishes undefeated. Ironically, as you said, they're the 5th seed, so we'll see what happens. Also, the game that, gosh, I can't wait to see how that rematch goes, and you and I were talking about this a little bit, is Eastwood and Oak Harbor is 8-9 game in the first round. I don't think either coach is going to be real thrilled that that's the game they're preparing for, but it's going to be maybe the best in Northwest Ohio first round game where you've got 2 teams that are local and see how they stack up. And Oak Harbor, who had not lost an NBC game prior to this year, they had their quarterback injured, had to figure some stuff out. They're on a little bit of a streak since the 2 back-to-back losses. And it wasn't like they lost to Eastwood in a close one. They got shellacked by Eastwood. And I'm imagining that the Rockets are going to go down to Pemberville and they're going to want to try and exercise some of the demons from that week. And then Genoa, again, congratulations to Bill Fisher and his staff, NBC champs for the first time in quite some time. And that's a Genoa team that's always been good, but in a lot of ways they remind me of kind of like a Whitmer or kind of like a Central, where they're going to be good every year, but the expectation out there in the community because of the level of play that they had under Mike Vickers and going through the coaching staff till now with Bill Fisher out there, they're going to expect that there's going to be league championships and first round buys and deep playoff runs. And for the first time in a few years, they've at least been able to achieve the league title and a first round playoff bye. And we'll see again where they end up. But I would have to say, if I'm circling one that I'm going to keep an eye on pretty closely on Friday, it's going to be that Oak Harbor and Eastwood game on Friday night. That's the one that probably intrigues me the most.
Most definitely. And looking into the future, what you get past that emotional battle one way or the other, waiting for you on the other side. Liberty Center is the number 1 seed in that region. Right. So you kind of have to ride that high and then get right back to it.
And the good news is, if you are one of those 2 teams, Archbold at least put a scare into the Tigers last week. They played them tighter than anybody has yet this year.
True.
Doesn't mean that you're going to be able to duplicate that or replicate what Archbold did, but there's at least a little bit of wear in the armor there to kind of say, all right, maybe there are some things we can exploit. My guess is whoever wins that game is going to be putting that Liberty Center Archbold game on, looking for what did the Blue Streaks do in that first half that allowed them to be up at halftime, but didn't have enough gas to finish the job. I'm curious to see if anybody can take down Liberty Center. I don't think so. I think, like I said, I think they're a legitimate state title contender out of that Region 18 right now, but Archbold at least has people thinking it's possible to upset the Tigers versus it being impossible going into the playoffs like we felt like last year.
Yeah.
So that'll wrap up this one. We'll go ahead and jump off there. Have another show again next week. We will talk with somebody. I don't know for sure yet. It kind of depends on who's still playing at that point. Might be Justin Keller. We might have him on for a refresher. We talked to him week 1, and obviously a lot's happened since the start of the regular season for him, and we can kind of reflect on maybe what his first year has been like and all the successes, the ups and downs, and all the different things that he's dealt with this year. But congratulations to Whitmer. Congratulations to Perrysburg on splitting that Buckeye division. Congrats to Napoleon. We talked about it last week, but winning that Cardinal division, really some fun games that we got to witness down the stretch, and a lot of fun games left ahead. If you missed any part of this, you can listen to the audio version of it on Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcast, Pandora, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Spreaker, Podcast Addict. So check it out there. If you want to watch it back, the shows stream live Thursday mornings on YouTube at 9:30. And then, of course, you can go back and watch them. They are archived on our channel. NLL Weekly is where you want to search. And wherever you get, if it's a podcast, whether it's the video, please like, please subscribe, please leave a rating, all that good stuff. We definitely appreciate it. It's helped. Want to say thank you to some of the Whitmer folks, some of the Whitmer parents. Scott Waddell, one of them, Brandon Waddell's dad, shared it out last week. And so I think a lot of people, it was nice to see, we're looking to what two guys who probably spend way too much time talking about high school football had to say about week 10. And so appreciate that support as well. So thanks to those guys for sharing that out. Thanks to you for listening. We will see you in week number 12. Happy playoffs, everybody. Bye.